Hello everyone, welcome back to Jungle Citizens, and today we are going to talk about one of the biggest chores in the garden and how to make your life easier. So we're going to be talking about weeding. What actually is a weed, how to weed, and how you can take small actions that will make your job and your life so much easier. So let's start and have a little look here. You can see we're making a path. If you just look there in the background, you can start seeing it taking shape. So we're actually in the process of weeding here. You can also see in front of me, there's a whole patch of green, weeds, as you'd call it. It's also worth taking a look in the background where we'd started making our bed. So we've got this big coconut clump here. Ooh, nice mushrooms. Very cool, jelly mushrooms. So you can see here, we've got one of our beds that are already ready. You can see that it's covered with mulch. The soil is very good. And there's very few weeds coming. What little weeds do come are very, very easy to take out. Actually, all the things growing pretty much are things that we want. This is a Monroon fragrans. This is a colocasia, wild one that we're happy with. Here you have a Schismatoglottis calyptrata. Here you've got a very nice Anthurium macrolobium. And you can see that things are starting to get really rather happy here. Now, obviously, they're all still a bit battered because of the move, but they're starting to look good. Oh yeah, look, see? New leaf on the Monstera adansonii. So anyway, the point here is you can't see many weeds here. And it's extremely easy to weed. Oh, look, there's a weed. That's an Acacia auriculiformis that actually becomes a very large tree, and it is highly invasive. It's from Australia. It shouldn't be here, so it's coming out. But this bit is very easy to weed because we've already done a lot of the hard work. Where we haven't done the hard work is here. So we're going to show you what we do to turn this into this, because if you turn your garden into this, you don't have to do much work, and it's an absolute lifesaver because weeding, as we all know, is incredibly tedious. It takes a huge amount of time from us, and it also, I mean, at least for me, it completely destroys my neck and my back. So let's get started. What is a weed? Weeds are considered pretty much anything that we don't want to have in the garden, or anything that we consider to be useless. That's a kind of small, fast-growing thing. There's no kind of standard definition for a weed, but more or less that's what it means. All over the world, it means all of the plants that grow up that we actually don't want them to grow up, whether it's in a farm or in a permaculture place or in your garden or in the lawn or whatever it is. However, many weeds are actually not weeds at all. They're small plants that are going to turn into trees, or they're going to turn into flowering plants, or perhaps they have a really important role for biodiversity. So the first step is, in your region, because this is extremely location specific, you have to understand what is a weed in your place, because it will be different wherever you go. So we're now going to zoom in a little bit on what is a weed for us. So let's take a look at this area here. And you can already see that there's lots of plants going on. And I mean, I have to tell you outright, I don't know what a lot of them are. I just know a lot of them are common, and they are what I would consider a weed. There are, however, a few things that are not weeds here. So let's take a look at this. Can you see that's like visibly different from everything else that's going on around here? So that is a very young Ficus racemosa that becomes a big tree. It's a fig tree, and it's super important for biodiversity. If this tree is allowed to grow up, it will provide shade, and that shade will reduce the amount of light hitting the ground, and that will reduce your weeds. So of course our thing is restoring forest, and we like our gardens to have trees, which is one of the main reasons we keep trees. But there's another really important reason. They are fantastic biomass accumulators. So even if you don't have space in your garden for a tree, it's actually very helpful to allow it to grow up. Even if you don't let it turn into a tree, keep it growing, because in the short term it will provide you a bit of shade, and you can then start cutting and lopping it back and then using all of that organic material that the tree is creating for you as mulch. So it's a fantastic biomass accumulator, and inevitably, if it's a native species, which this is, it's going to be a very important host plant for butterflies, for caterpillars, for other insects. It's going to be a biodiversity benefit in general, and our gardens are wild spaces. That is where our human needs meet nature's needs, which means that we need to work in balance with nature. So if you have trees coming up in your garden, our suggestion would be keep them, even if it's just to cut them later and to use them as mulch. So this is a Ficus racemosa, and barely a couple of months ago it was the same size as that tiny little plant that we just found you, and you can see it's probably about 1.3, 1.4 meters now. Lots of green leaves. If we don't want this, we can just trim it down and use it as mulch and just keep allowing it to grow up, shape it, put it on the ground and allow it to do its job at suppressing the weeds and putting organic material into your garden. Because it's a native, as I've said before, it's important for biodiversity, but it's not just trees that are important for biodiversity. It's shrubs, it's herbs, it's epiphytes. Anything that's native generally will have a value in the garden. Now, of course, we do need to keep the gardens tidy and lots of things can be very messy. So in garden areas, we do have to take out a bunch of native plants because otherwise it gets to be too much work. But it's always important to know if it's native to your area, it will be giving something back to biodiversity. And at that point, it's up to us to take a call whether or not it's something we want to keep in the garden or not. If it's not native, you probably should get rid of it. So there's a couple more things here that I would consider to not be weeds. Here you have a little baby colocasia, which is always a very nice one to have, and Centella asiatica. So this is actually a very medicinal plant and it's edible. So yeah, there, just in this little patch, you have at least 3 things that are of value. But you have an awful lot of things that are your very fast growing, very strong kind of weeds, which for us includes basically all grasses, because you don't have grasses really in wet tropical evergreen forests. And then it includes invasives and stuff. So here you've got one of the eupatoriums. This is a highly invasive plant from South America. Here you have just one of these very common, very spready, fast growing, I think it's a native, but it's weedy, grows very quickly, it grows out of control, it ends up covering the ground and it stops other things from growing up. So these kind of things we have to take out. So what you want to be doing is taking all of this stuff out unless it's something that you can see is different. So you guys really need to delve into your native ecology and start observing very closely the sort of plants that you have growing in order to be able to start recognizing and identifying them. You don't have to be an expert botanist to do this or some kind of a real plant expert. It is just about spending time observing, understanding what there is in your ecosystem, understanding how it behaves, understanding how gregarious it is, how strong it is, and then basically making your own kind of mind map of what is a weed in your area. But you don't have to know exactly what the plants are necessarily. You don't have to really understand the finer details about the taxonomy. All you need to know is kind of what plant looks like what. It's like this, look, this is going to become a tree. Leave it here. It's an asset. It's a value. This absolutely isn't. Out it comes. These guys aren't. Out they come. And the more you do it, the more you start recognizing these little patterns. What is a tree looking like when it's small? How does your beautiful ornamental shrub that grows wild in your area, how does that look when it's small? That only happens through lots of observing and understanding. The last point, don't beat yourself up if you pull out something that's actually valuable. 1, because you've pulled it out by the root, you might well be able to plant it again. And 2, even after, I don't even know, more than 10 years of living in this ecosystem and doing this thing, I'm still making mistakes. Inevitably, nature wants to spread its seeds. Plants naturally want to spread, so you will always get certain good plants coming into your garden, especially if you've got lots of birds and things, because of course they carry seeds in their stomachs when they eat the fruits. Now look, you'll notice I'm taking them out by hand. I am not using a lawnmower, I'm not using a brush cutter machine, I'm uprooting them, because then they don't come back. If I come here and cut this with a brush cutter machine, I'm cutting all of this stuff down, but the root node stays, which means that everything comes back again, but twice as fast, because by now the roots had a few months to establish. So if you cut this all back, you're just making the problem worse and worse and worse and worse. There's some plants where this is a really big issue, like for example the chromalena that we will have talked about over and over again. If you cut that, eventually that root node in the ground becomes more like a tree trunk and the roots are incredibly strong, but all that's coming out of the top is these little useless things, so you've got nothing to grab to pull out. Oh yes. you can see these grasses are starting to flower. So when these guys flower, it won't be long before the seeds come. And when the seeds come, they then spread into the area that you've already weeded. So you have to time this very carefully. Work out when your grasses, when your weeds, when your invasive plants are flowering, and make sure you do the weeding before that. Because if you do it during or after the flowering or the seeding, you're just spreading more seeds. And again, you're doubling your workload. Right, on with the time lapse. So guys, we've done the first step. We've done a majority of the kind of weeding. You can see it's a lot more open. Now, you'll see that we've piled all of the stuff up here, and we've actually got piles all over the place like this, because if you use this as mulch, very often it will just start growing back again in a very short space of time. So instead of spreading it as mulch, put it into a pile, allow it all to rot down, to heat up, to decompose, and then you can use it as mulch, or you can use it as soil, or you put it as a biomass input into your compost or whatever it is. But don't leave it and spread it as mulch. This is an example of one of the piles that we made a couple of months ago, and you can see that it's now pretty much turned into soil, and you've got all of these new things coming up. So what you might have to do once or twice is to just turn this in order to make sure that all the little seeds and whatever things were alive in there are not going to keep coming up. So you just give that one nice turn, and now again we leave that a few more weeks, make sure that everything in there is nice and dead, and at that point it can go on as mulch. Or you can leave it a little bit longer, and then you end up having really nice soil, because look, it's really starting to get there already. All of these little weeds that are left here now, you could really get very, very neurotic about it and take them all out. And to be honest, sometimes I am. But there's no need, because it's all going to get covered with soil. Look, see this beautiful little plant. So these kind of things we keep. And if they survive, we really don't mind, because they're good ground cover. And there's a few kind of plants like that. But for now, we've got this main kind of weeding job done. The next thing that's very important to do is to cover the soil, because if we don't cover the soil, all of these small plants are going to start coming up again. And right now in this area, we don't want that. So the first thing we'll have to do is move this massive, great big lump to here, and then we're going to have to move the soil. New generation is only doing phones, not working. Very good ones, huh?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inside?
No, we have koita. We can do it. Thank you. Extremely good coconut. So now the final step is we have our mulch. Now obviously we have the luxury of all of this amazing mulch that's come from Clinton. Unfortunately it does come with a bit of plastic, because generally people just, well, they throw the plastic everywhere, but it is what it is. So this is nice broken down mulch. If you can, the layer that is immediately above the soil, you want it to be material that's already a little bit broken up, because that allows all of the microorganisms, all the mycorrhizae to really get into there and to break it down quickly, because it's already started to be broken down. So this now comes in here. So as you can see, this is quite kind of broken down material already. So we're going to use this to liberally cover. There's a plastic leaf. Plastic leaf, everyone. That is what the world is coming to. My goodness. Anyway, yeah, we now use this mulch to very liberally cover everything. And you can see that all of those little weeds that were under here are now covered. Most of them are not going to be able to get out from here, because it's now going to get compressed. It's going to heating up in that process of decomposition. So you just save yourself a bit of time by not really going in and taking out all of the tiny bits. And if something does survive and come through, it's only going to be 1 or 2 pieces, and it's very easy to then pull them out, you know. There you go. Where did that centella go? You see, there's that little centella. So we're just going to make sure in the short term, and there's something else here. I don't know what that is. So if you have found things that are useful, you obviously want to memorize where they are and then avoid covering them because you kind of want them to come out. But there you have it, guys. That is it. So we now have ourselves a nice prepared bed. We've taken out the weeds, what we consider to be weeds here because they are weedy for us here. We've made sure that they're all nice and clean. We've then established where the line for the path and the bed is going to be. And then we have filled the space with mulch. At some point, something is going to start coming up. So the next and the most important thing is you have 2 options. You can either plant this up with plants that are going to take that space. So I think in here I might plant some Alocasia pseudo-sanderianas. It's a little bit too bright for anthuriums, unfortunately, but maybe a couple of the creeping, crawling philodendrons, you know, maybe some silver clouds or something like that. So you then have to get this area planted with things that will take that space. If you do that, you will, well, that's not, you will have to weed here again, but it will be minute little bits of weeding. And the perfect example of that is exactly behind where you can see this is what we did when we arrived 2 or 3 months ago. We have not gone in here and weeded, and we can take a little walk. Let's just have a little look, you know. Obviously we have to do a lot of work here, but we've got a mango coming up and we like mangoes. Here we've got a philodendron silver cloud. Back here we've got a philodendron radiatum. There's some kind of a emerald something or other. There's another silver cloud here. There's a polyschistum, anthurium polyschistum coming up, but you can see there's not really any weeds coming. So all you have to do to maintain that is to just check every couple of months and to do a little bit of cleaning and maintenance work. The last bit here, if you want to give it a little bit more, is do a little bit of cutting. This whole thing can come out. And then you can cover the top bit with strong mulch, because that is then going to inhibit things even further. And then if you keep adding on mulch over and over again, you're never going to get those weeds coming up. You're only going to have the plants that you want to be growing. And in the end, that's kind of what we want to have in a garden, no? We want to be doing it in such a way where it maximizes the impact, it has the most amazing plants, and it's not lots of work. And that's the key. Really, really, really important. I know it looks like a lot of work, but trust me, if you put the work in the short term, you have long-term and really, really effective results. That means in just a few years, you can spend more time sitting and enjoying your garden and less time on your hands and knees doing all of the dirty work. You can do the things that are fun. So that's all for today. Hopefully this is something that will be very helpful for you all, and in the long run will save you lots of time, energy, and a bad back. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one, I suppose.